Good morning, students. Today we have to see ninth standard 4th unit poem The Spider and the Fly. It is written by Mary Hyde. She was an English poet and author of the famous poem The Spider and the Fly. Her life begins with 12th March 1799, Colford, United Kingdom. Her life ends with 30th January 1888, Rome, Italy. She was a 19th century English author who is best remembered for her famous children's poem The Spider and the Fly. Her literary output was considerable and collaborating on many projects with her husband. She had over 180 books to her name. She translated several tales by Hans Christian Andersen. The Spider and the Fly's main theme is be distrustful of useless, sweet talk that is insincere. Not all praise or advice is genuine. Therefore, you must be careful of who you listen to, and to an evil counselor, close heart and ear and eye. For that matter, the poet would rather like us not coming into contact at all with sweet tongued people with not so sweet intentions. That means the spider's pursuit of the fly is a charming invitation into his home. Yet the sociable chart is edged with a sense of mistrust, a sense of danger that comes with these two characters, the spider and the fly, being natural predator and prey. That means men and women. Men is the spider, women is the fly. Now let us see the poem. Will you walk into my parlor? Said the spider to the fly. It is the prettiest little parlor that ever you did spy. The way into my parlor is up a winding stair, and I have many pretty things to show when you are there. Oh, no, no, said the little fly. To ask me is in vain, for who goes up your winding stair can never come down again. That means in the first stanza, we observe the spider alluring the fly to his parlor. He tries to entice the fly by saying that he has many pretty things to show her inside the parlor. The spider portrays his home as a mysterious place, but the fly understands that it is a trap and rejects his invitation by saying that she knows that whoever goes in there never comes out. Second stanza. I am sure you must be weary, dear, with soaring up so high. Will you rest upon my little bed? Said the spider to the fly. There are pretty curtains drawn around. The seats are fine and thin, and if you like to rest a while, I will snugly tuck you in. Oh, no, no, said the little fly, for I have often heard it said, they never, never wake again who sleep upon your bed. That means, in this stanza, the first, the spider employed a different trick to convince the fly to enter his home. He fakes concern for her by saying that she must be tried and offers her to get some rest on his snug little bed. He tries to tempt her with a false sense of security, as he says that there are pretty curtains drawn around. But she refuses the spider's offer and says that she absolutely aware that how whoever goes to step on his bed never wakes up. The repetition of the word never emphasizes on the distrust of the fly for the spider. Saying spider to the fly, "Dear friend, what shall I do to prove the warm affection I have always felt for you? I have within a pantry good store for all that's nice. I am sure you are very welcome. Will you please to take a slice?" "Oh, no, no," said the little fly. "Kind sir, that can't be. I have heard what's in your pantry, and I do not wish to see." That means this time of the spider tries to befriend the fly by calling her dear friend. He wants to establish a false bond of friendship and affection in order to lure the fly into his home. Again he persuades the fly to fulfill his wish by offering her good food from his pantry. The fly is whoever determined not to be tricked by the cunning spider. She tactfully refers to the spider as kind sir and tells us that she is not interested in seeing what he has to offer her. Fourth stanza. "Sweet creature," said the spider, "you are witty and you are wise. How handsome are your gauzy wings! How brilliant are your eyes! I have a little looking glass upon my parlor shelf. If you will sleep, if you will step in one moment, dear, you shall behold yourself. I thank you, gentle sir," she said, "for what you are pleased to say, and bidding you good morning. Now I will call another day." That means the spider does not give up. This time he tries to flatter the fly into doing what he once had to do. He calls a sweet creature that is witty and wise. He acknowledges the fly's smartness and decides to coax her by repeatedly complimenting her. He also compliments her appearance. He wants to show the fly how beautiful she is, offering her a looking glass to look at herself and appreciate her own beauty. The point to be noted in that until now the spider had been asking her to step into his home. "Will you walk into my parlor?" The stanza. The spider turned him round about and went to his den. For well he knew the sly fly would soon be back again. So he wove a subtle web into a little corner sly and set his table ready to dine upon the fly. Then he came out to his door again and merrily did sing, come hither, pretty fly, with a pearl and silver wing. Your robes are green and purple, there is a crust upon your head. Your eyes are like the diamond bright, but mine are dull as lead." That means he goes on to flatter the fly by referring to her pearl and silver wing. He lures her by saying that her robes are green and purple and her eyes are as bright and beautiful as a diamond. He goes on a step forward by comparing the fly's eyes with his own. He says that the fly's eyes are like shining diamonds. His eyes are just dull as lead. He belittle his own looks to emphasize on the beauty of the fly, so that the impact of his flattery becomes stronger. Sixth one. "Alas, alas, how very soon this silly little fly, hearing his really flattering words, came slowly flitting by. With buzzing wings she hung aloft, the near and nearer drew, thinking only of her brilliant eyes and green and purple home. thinking only of her crested head. Poor foolish thing! At last, up jumped the cunning spider and fiercely held her fast. He dragged her up his winding staff into his dismal den within his little parlor, but she never came out again. That means the spider seems ever more confident now. The weapon of vanity worked out for him, and he finally deceived the fly to succumb to his evil desires. The fly is bewitched by the spider's flattery and decides to slowly approach the spider's web. The fly is engrossed in her own beauty and thinks only of her brilliant eyes and her crested head. Taking advantages of this moment, the spider bounces on her and fiercely catches her. The spider quickly drags her up to his winging star and then to his den and finally to his little parlor. The fly's words finally hold true for her own self, as well as she never come out of the devious fly's home. Last stanza. And now, dear little children, who may this story read to idle, silly, flattering words? I pray you never give heed unto an evil counselor, close heart and ear and eye, and take a lesson from this tale of the spider and the fly. That means we observe a sudden change in the tone and narration of the poem in the last stanza. The poet carefully transformed the story into a message to the children reading the poem. The poet advises and warns the children not to pay attention to ideal, silly, and flattering words. He asks everyone to take a lesson from the story of the spider and the fly and asks them not to commit the same mistake that the fly committed. The poem ends with a direct address from the speaker to the children listening to the poem. They are warned to ignore flattery and take a lesson from this didactic poem. The poem also functions as a warning to women to sidestep the flattery of smooth talking predatory men. Now we have to see literary devices. This poem is a cautionary fable that fails in the dark humor category. As most fables go, it anthropomorphizes characters to convey moral lessons. Anthropomorphism means to endow a non human character with human traits and behaviors. For example, throughout the poem, we see the spider's web described with features as in a normal human house. We see a pantry, bed, mirror, stairs, and so on. This human touches also serve as metaphor, giving the poem an absolute relatability that makes its moral lesson more memorable.